The palace had already surrendered to night when the sound began. Not a crash, not an alarm. A vibration, low, metallic, almost shy in its insistence, as though something beneath the marble floors had shifted its weight after decades of silence. Kensington Palace, at that hour, moved with ceremonial stillness. Lamps along the private corridors cast amber halos against cream panel walls. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood and distant rain drifting across the gardens. Guards rotated shifts with disciplined quiet. Staff logged final entries before retreating into unseen quarters. It was a night like hundreds before it, until the maintenance alert surfaced. It did not flash red. It did not trigger sirens. It appeared as a coded irregularity within the estate's environmental monitoring system, a fluctuation in pressure along a long-sealed utility line beneath the southern wing. Most would have dismissed it, but Royal Household Security did not dismiss irregularities beneath royal foundations. Within 6 minutes, the anomaly report was routed to the on-duty protection command officer. Within 10, it reached the private communications desk assigned to the Prince of Wales. And within 15 minutes, Prince William was standing alone beside the tall windows of his study, reading the briefing on a secured tablet. The gardens beyond him silvered in moonlight. He did not speak immediately. The message was procedural, calm, technical. Unscheduled vibration detected, sublevel corridor C19. Area listed as decommissioned 1943. No authorized access logged. He read it twice, then once more. Behind the language of infrastructure and classification lay something else, something older. See, 19 was not merely a pipe channel. It was part of a network of service corridors constructed during the Second World War. Spaces meant to move people unseen, to shelter, to secure continuity in times of threat. They had been sealed decades ago. William lowered the tablet slowly. "Who else has seen this?" he asked. The protection officer standing near the doorway, Commander Richard Hale, 27 years in Royal Protection, answered without hesitation. "Only Tier 1 clearance, sir. Myself, the Master Security. And now you." A pause. No external notification. William nodded once. "Show me." The camera would drift then, if this were filmed, through the quiet stone archways, past portraits of monarchs long past, down a servant staircase rarely used in the modern routine of palace life. The descent was not dramatic. It was deliberate. William did not hurry. He did not speculate aloud. But those who knew him understood the shift in his posture, the subtle tightening across his shoulders, the measured silence that meant he was already thinking 3 decisions ahead. The lower levels of Kensington Palace did not resemble the grandeur above. The air cooled noticeably as they descended. The scent of damp stone replaced polished oak. Lighting grew functional, narrow fluorescent fixtures humming softly against brick walls that bore the soot memory of another century. A security technician waited at the base landing, tablet in hand. Pressure variance localized near C19 Southern Junction. He reported quietly. No movement detected currently, but the system registered strain. "Strain," William repeated. "Yes, sir." The corridor ahead was narrow. Pipes ran exposed along the ceiling, cast iron, riveted joints, insulation wrapped decades prior. Many bore brass plates stamped with wartime dates. They walked single file, boots against concrete, echoes traveling farther than comfort allowed. Halfway down the passage, the air shifted again. Cooler still, tinged faintly with rust. Commander Hale slowed. "Sir," he murmured. The corridor ended in a utility chamber, door long removed, replaced by a reinforced security grate installed during a modernization review in the late 1990s. The padlock on the grate remained intact, untouched. Hale knelt, inspected it. No forced entry. William stepped closer. "Open it." The key turned with resistance, metal, and used emotion. The grate swung inward with a low groan. Inside, the chamber was smaller than expected, bare, functional. A junction point where 3 major pipes met, 2 horizontal, 1 vertical, converging like a steel spine rising through stone. For a moment, nothing seemed out of place. Dust along the floor, old maintenance tags, a forgotten ladder bolted into the wall. Then the light shifted. A security technician angled his flashlight toward the vertical pipe, and there, glinting cold beneath the beam, steel, modern, unmistakable, a pair of handcuffs, fastened tightly around the pipe at shoulder height. The metal was clean, untarnished, industrial polished, the locking mechanism intact. No rust, no age, not decorative, not antique, used. Silence fell so completely it seemed to thicken the air. The camera would hold there on the contrast. Victorian pipework, stone older than memory, and stainless steel reflecting electric light. William did not step forward immediately. He looked, not as a man surprised, but as a leader calculating. "Photograph everything," he said quietly. The technician obeyed. Click, click, each shutter echoing too loudly in the confined space. Commander Hale examined the cuffs without touching them. "Standard restraint issue," he said. "Not palace inventory." "Recent?" William asked. "Yes, sir." A pause. William stepped closer then, close enough to see faint abrasions on the inner hinge. Subtle scuffs that only formed when metal pressed against movement. Someone had struggled here. The realization did not arrive as panic. It arrived as weight. This chamber was not accessible without clearance. It was not visible on public tours. It did not exist in any contemporary operational map, except those maintained under restricted archival classification. To reach this space required knowledge, authorization, intent. The echo of boots on concrete wasn't just sound. It was discipline made audible. But tonight, discipline had been breached. "Seal this corridor," William said evenly. "Code 7B. The technician inhaled slightly. 7B was not routine. It signified internal irregularity, requiring compartmentalized review. Access frozen. Logs isolated. Staff movement audited quietly. "Yes, sir." William studied the cuffs again. "Has anyone reported a missing person?" "No, sir." "Any staff disciplinary actions conducted off record?" "None recorded." Recorded. The word lingered. William straightened. "This does not leave this corridor," he said. Commander Hale met his gaze. "Understood." They exited the chamber. The grate closed. The lock returned to place, though now it secured evidence rather than emptiness. As they walked back through the narrow passage, William's silence changed in quality. It was no longer observational. It was contemplative. The palace above them, with its portraits and public engagements, its ceremonies and polished diplomacy, stood unaware that beneath its marble floors lay something that did not belong to history. Handcuffs are not symbolic objects within a monarchy. They are instruments. Instruments of restraint, of authority, of control. And control without record is something far more dangerous. At the base of the stairwell, William paused. "Pull the last 12 months of access log for all sub-level classifications," he instructed. "Yes, sir." "And the discretionary maintenance allocations." Hale hesitated half a second. "That will require review at household committee level." "Then we review it." There was no anger in his voice, only resolve. They ascended. Above them, the palace resumed its composure, unaware of the fracture beneath. But what followed next would not remain contained within concrete walls. Hours later, in a secured office lined with archival maps, William stood before a schematic of Kensington Palace's original foundation plans. Sections have been redrawn over decades, corridors sealed, rooms repurposed, emergency infrastructure quietly modernized. Yet C-19 remained marked as decommissioned 1943. No modern annotation. No maintenance justification. Nothing to explain contemporary steel biting into wartime iron. "Someone knew the space existed," William said. "Yes, sir." "And someone believed it would not be found." He traced the pipe's route with his finger. It ran deeper than he remembered, beneath additional wings, beneath archival storage, toward areas rarely audited because they were assumed inert. Assumption, the most dangerous element in any institution. A junior analyst entered quietly, tablet trembling slightly in her grip. "Sir, there is one anomaly." William turned. "Go on." 6 months ago, Corridor C-19 registered a brief keycard activation. Duration, 3 minutes. Classified under routine maintenance. Authorized by, she swallowed, delegated clearance. Level 4. Level 4 did not open sealed wartime corridors. William's gaze hardened, not in fury, but in focus. Flag it. Quietly. Yes, sir. The palace clock above chimed midnight. A new day, but beneath its marble floors, something older had stirred, and it was not merely vibration in pipes. It was a question. Who had used heritage blind spots to conceal modern action, and why? William dismissed the room slowly, leaving only Commander Hale beside him. This is not about scandal, William said after a moment. No, sir, it is about responsibility. He turned toward the darkened window overlooking palace gardens. Whatever happened beneath this estate happened under my watch. The words were not performative. They were factual. Leadership in a monarchy is inherited, but accountability is chosen. He exhaled once. Begin internal review. Restricted channel. No speculation. No conclusions. Yes, sir. The machinery of quiet investigation began turning before dawn. Logs requested, archives flagged, access hierarchies mapped against timeline anomalies. Above, the public would wake to routine headlines. Below, the pipes remained still, but they were no longer silent, because somewhere within the palace's forgotten architectural memory lay an answer, and William understood instinctively that the handcuffs were not the beginning. They were the residue. The camera would linger one final time in that sealed chamber, on steel against iron. Old authority, new misuse, and as the corridor lights dimmed under security code 7B, a single truth settled heavily in the air. Foundations do not crack loudly. They whisper first. The corridor beneath the palace was sealed now, but the echo of that discovery had not quieted. It moved upward instead, through offices where portraits watched without expression, through committee chambers polished by decades of measured debate, through private desks where discretion had always been a monarchy's strongest currency. By dawn, Kensington Palace appeared unchanged. Morning light poured through tall sash windows. Gardeners moved methodically across frost-tipped lawns. Couriers arrived with red-bound briefing folders. The machinery of royal life resumed its precise choreography, but behind the visible calm, an internal mechanism had begun turning. One rarely activated, an institutional audit, and Prince William stood at its center. The camera would open on a long oak table inside a secured archival room. Temperature-controlled, sound-buffered, reserved for documents not meant for circulation. On that table lay blueprints. Original foundation plans dated 1689. Wartime modification schematics from 1941. Emergency evacuation routes drawn in heavy pencil. Corridors annotated in ink that had faded into sepia. Among them, Corridor C-19, marked clearly in older drafts. Then crossed through in 1943 with a single notation. Decommissioned. Structural redundancy. William studied the pages without haste. Redundancy, he repeated quietly. Across from him sat Dr. Eleanor March, estate historian, 21 years in service, specialist in royal infrastructure during wartime. It was part of a contingency system, she explained. During the Blitz, additional holding chambers were constructed beneath several royal residences. Not detention facilities, temporary shelters, and controlled movement areas in case of direct threat. Controlled movement, William said. Yes, sir, for dignitaries. Staff, in extreme scenarios. He traced the margin with his finger. Why seal it? Post-war cost rationalization. And perhaps, she paused, symbolism. After the war, the crown wished to signal stability, not siege readiness. Silence settled. Above them, faint footsteps crossed marble floors, unaware that beneath lay a map of forgotten contingency. William leaned back. Was C-19 ever repurposed? Not officially. Unofficially, Dr. March hesitated. There are no records of such. Records, the word had begun to fracture in meaning, because by mid-morning, Security Command had delivered the first internal log analysis. Commander Hale placed the encrypted tablet before William. 12 months of sublevel access, he said. Isolated and cross-referenced. William scrolled slowly. Most entries were expected. Infrastructure checks, humidity monitoring, pipe insulation maintenance. Routine. Until they weren't. 6 activations. All brief. All classified under maintenance review. All signed under delegated authority. Not primary command. Dates spaced irregularly across 6 months. Always after 2340 hours. Always cleared within 3 minutes. 3 minutes, William murmured. Not enough time to conduct structural testing. No, sir. And no footage? Corridor cameras in that wing were decommissioned in 2008 during renovation. Assumed unnecessary. Assumed. The most dangerous word in governance. William's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. Heritage blind spots. Space is preserved for history, neglected by oversight. He closed the tablet. Open Royal Household Committee records for discretionary maintenance allocations. Hale nodded once. That will require chairman approval. Then we convene. By afternoon, the Household Committee gathered inside a private council chamber. High ceilings, tall windows overlooking the inner courtyard, walls lined with portraits of sovereigns whose reigns had survived wars and abdications alike. 7 members seated. Senior administrative officials, legal counsel, financial oversight, all accustomed to internal deliberation. But not this. William entered without ceremony. They rose. He gestured for them to sit. The room settled into formal quiet. I'll be direct, he began. An anomaly has been discovered within a sealed sublevel corridor beneath this estate. Measured glances passed between members. Security Code 7B has been enacted, he continued. I require clarification regarding 6 after-hours maintenance authorizations signed under delegated authority over the past 6 months. The chairman, Sir Malcolm Evering, folded his hands. Routine structural reviews, Your Royal Highness. Routine, William echoed. Yes. And the justification for Corridor C19? A brief pause. An outdated utility line was flagged for evaluation. William leaned slightly forward. C19 has been sealed since 1943. Sir Malcolm held his gaze. Heritage spaces still require inspection. Inspection does not require modern restraints, William said quietly. The word hung there. Restraints. A faint ripple passed through the table. Sir Malcolm's composure shifted. Subtly. I'm unaware of what you're implying. I'm not implying, William replied. I'm clarifying. Silence thickened. Across the table, the head of finance adjusted her glasses. Discretionary funds were allocated for enhanced internal security measures earlier this year, she offered cautiously. Define enhanced. Upgrades not visible to the public. Preventative. William's voice remained calm. And the procurement of standard issue steel handcuffs falls under preventative maintenance? The room stilled. Sir Malcolm blinked once. Handcuffs. Yes. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. For the first time, uncertainty fractured the room's composure. Sir Malcolm's gaze shifted briefly toward the legal counsel seated beside him. A flicker of something unspoken. William observed it. Institutional discomfort rarely manifests loudly. It shows in glances, in hesitations measured in seconds. Who authorized the delegated clearances? William asked. Sir Malcolm inhaled carefully. I did. The admission landed without theatrics. And under whose recommendation? Security advisory. From whom? A longer pause. Internal counsel. Names, William said. The request was not a demand. It was inevitability. Sir Malcolm hesitated, and in that hesitation, something deeper surfaced. Because this was no longer about a pipe. It was about internal authority. Those discussions were classified, Sir Malcolm said quietly. William's voice did not rise. So is this. The legal counsel cleared his throat. Your Royal Highness. If this concerns disciplinary procedures, certain matters are handled discreetly to preserve institutional integrity. Disciplinary procedures, William repeated slowly. Conducted beneath sealed wartime infrastructure? No answer came. The silence now carried weight, not of scandal, but of exposure. William stood. I will not protect process over principle, he said evenly. Provide full documentation within 12 hours. The meeting dissolved in restrained unease. As members exited, the camera would linger on Sir Malcolm, shoulders squared but eyes distant. Meanwhile, behind the stone walls of the palace, a junior security officer drafted a private report. Her name was Aisha Rahman, newly assigned to royal protection, meticulous, observant. She had been reviewing metadata from the maintenance logs. Something had unsettled her. Each of the 6 access events showed delegated clearance, but buried within system architecture was a secondary signature, a silent override code used only by Tier 2 internal command, a code that did not belong to Sir Malcolm. She hesitated before submitting it. Then she did. Marked confidential. Addressed directly to Commander Hale. Hours later, Hale stood in William's office once more. "There's an additional authorization layer embedded in the keycard activations," he said. William looked up. "Meaning?" Someone above delegated authority confirmed each entry. "Name." Hale hesitated. "The code corresponds to Executive Administrative Tier." William understood instantly. Tier reserved for senior palace oversight. Positions not routinely questioned. "Which office?" he asked. Hale swallowed. "The Office of Internal Governance." The room felt smaller. Internal governance existed to ensure ethical compliance, safeguarding, procedural transparency. The irony was almost surgical. William walked to the window again. Outside, tourists gathered near the gates. Cameras raised to a palace facade that appeared immutable. He spoke quietly. "Recover CCTV from the service lift adjacent to C-19. Already in process. Even fragments." "Yes, sir." By evening, partial footage had been reconstructed. Grainy. Timestamp 012. 2 figures entering the service lift. Faces obscured by angle and low light. One taller, one slight. The taller individual held something metallic at their side. The footage cut after 7 seconds, corrupted. But what remained was enough to eliminate denial. Someone had used that corridor. More than once. The emotional midpoint arrived not as anger, but as realization. If internal governance authorized access, then this was not a rogue act. It was structured, concealed beneath heritage. William watched the loop again. "Enhancements," he murmured. "Sir, the discretionary funds." Hale nodded. "Yes." Traced the purchase records. Within the hour, procurement documents surfaced. Item: restraint equipment, private security enhancement. Quantity: 2 pairs. Vendor: Metropolitan Tactical Supply. Authorized under discretionary allocation. Signed digitally. By Executive Administrative Tier. William closed the file slowly. If this was internal discipline, he said, why bypass established safeguarding protocol? Hale did not answer, because the answer was unspoken. Control without record. The palace clock struck 9. Outside, the facade glowed gold under floodlights. Inside, centuries of tradition pressed quietly against a present that felt more fragile than it had hours before. William dismissed the room. Alone now, he returned to the wartime blueprint. The pipes running through C-19 did not end there. They extended beneath archival storage rooms, beneath administrative offices. Heritage architecture designed to ensure survival during invasion, now repurposed perhaps to conceal internal enforcement. He placed both palms on the table. Institutions are not preserved by silence. They are preserved by scrutiny. But scrutiny fractures comfort, and comfort within monarchy is often mistaken for stability. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Commander Hale re-entered. Sir, there's more. William looked up. Aisha Rahman's report indicates one additional anomaly. Go on. One of the access dates aligns with an unexplained staff transfer. A senior aide resigned abruptly the following morning. No formal complaint filed. Name: Thomas Hallberg. William recognized it instantly. Aide-de-camp to internal governance. Transferred without ceremony. No farewell notice. No announcement. Just absence. Locate him, William said quietly. Yes, sir. Hale paused. Your Royal Highness, if internal governance is implicated, I know. The words carried no tremor. If misconduct occurred within these walls, William continued. Concealing it fractures us more deeply than exposure ever could. The camera would shift then, moving through empty corridors past silent portraits, down toward the sealed grate of C-19. Security tape now marked its perimeter, a silent warning. But beneath that warning lay something more profound, a test, not of security, but of leadership. Because the deeper William examined the architecture of the palace, the clearer it became. Silence had structure. It had signatures. It had funding lines and delegated authority. And someone had believed those structures would protect them. They were wrong. As midnight approached once more, William stood alone in the dim council chamber. He did not yet know the full truth, but he knew this. The pipes beneath the marble floors did not merely carry water. They carried history. And history, when misused, corrodes from within. He extinguished the lights. The room darkened, but the investigation had only just begun. The palace was awake, but it was no longer calm. The echo of investigation had replaced the echo of ceremony. Somewhere between tradition and exposure, something fragile had begun to tremble. By morning, the confidential report from Officer Aisha Rahman had been verified 3 times over. The secondary authorization code embedded in the C-19 access logs did not belong to Sir Malcolm alone. It belonged to Executive Administrative Tier. An Executive Administrative Tier did not act without purpose. The courtyard outside shimmered under pale winter light as senior staff moved with deliberate composure. No raised voices, no visible alarm, only the subtle tightening of posture that comes when internal equilibrium is disturbed. Inside the prince's private office, the atmosphere felt heavier. Commander Hale stood near the mantel. The digital authorization chain had been reconstructed, he said quietly. Each of the 6 entries required dual confirmation. Sir Malcolm, William said, and 1 additional clearance. Name it. Hale hesitated. Sir Jonathan Mercer, Director of Internal Governance. The room seemed to narrow. Sir Jonathan Mercer had served the household for nearly 18 years. Educated, disciplined, known for procedural rigor. He chaired safeguarding audits, oversaw internal compliance reviews, drafted ethical guidelines referenced across royal residences. He was not a reckless man, which made this more troubling. William did not react outwardly. Has he been informed of our findings? No, sir. Then he will be. The camera would follow William down a long corridor lined with muted tapestries, woven scenes of battles long resolved, treaties long signed. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Leadership tested not only by external threat, but by internal fracture. Sir Jonathan's office overlooked the inner garden, a room defined by order, files stacked precisely, diplomas framed symmetrically, the faint scent of ink and polished leather lingering in the air. He rose as William entered. Your Royal Highness. Sir Jonathan. No handshake, no ceremony. William remained standing. I'll be direct. Sir Jonathan inclined his head. I would expect nothing less. 6 unauthorized entries to Corridor C. 19 were cleared under your executive code. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed Sir Jonathan's expression. C-19, he repeated. A decommissioned wartime corridor, William continued. Accessed after midnight. Signed under delegated authority. Confirmed by you. Silence expanded. Sir Jonathan exhaled slowly. Yes. The admission came without deflection. For what purpose? William asked. A precautionary review. Define precautionary. Sir Jonathan's hands rested calmly on the desk. There were internal concerns. What concerns? He hesitated, not in fear, but in calculation. Behavioral instability among certain staff members. Matters best addressed discreetly. William's gaze sharpened. Discreetly does not mean unrecorded. No one was harmed, Sir Jonathan said carefully. William's voice remained measured. Steel restraints were affixed to a pipe in that corridor. Sir Jonathan did not immediately respond. That equipment was acquired under private security enhancement. He said at last, For whom? For containment. The word landed heavily. Containment of what? William asked. Sir Jonathan's jaw tightened. A volatile situation. A staff member exhibiting unpredictable conduct. Name. A longer pause. Thomas Hallberg. The name now carried weight beyond absence. William stepped closer. Why was this not handled through formal safeguarding channels? Sir Jonathan's composure held, but barely. Because formal channels create records, he replied quietly. The room fell still. And records, William said, create accountability. Yes. There it was. The fracture. Sir Jonathan's gaze did not waver. I believe discretion served the institution. William's voice lowered. By restraining a staff member in a sealed wartime chamber? It was temporary, Sir Jonathan insisted. A precaution to prevent escalation. He was not detained long. How long? Minutes. CCTV suggests otherwise. That struck. Sir Jonathan inhaled sharply. You recovered footage? Enough. A silence heavier than any before settled between them. The emotional midpoint arrived not as anger, but as moral reckoning. Sir Jonathan had not acted impulsively. He had acted deliberately. He had chosen secrecy over transparency, control over protocol, protection of reputation over adherence to process. William's voice softened, and that softness carried more weight than accusation. You oversee safeguarding. Yes. You draft ethical compliance standards. Yes. And yet you bypass both. Sir Jonathan's eyes lowered briefly. The first sign of fracture. I miscalculated. On what? On the risk. To whom? The Crown, he answered. William's reply came quietly. The Crown is not protected by silence. The words hung in the air, steady, unshaken. Sir Jonathan straightened. Thomas Hallberg had begun raising internal allegations, he said. Claims of procedural misconduct, budgetary irregularities. He threatened escalation beyond internal channels. So you contained him. I assessed him as unstable. Did a medical professional confirm that? No. Did safeguarding review his claims? No. William absorbed the admission without visible reaction. And what were those allegations? Sir Jonathan hesitated, then spoke. Misuse of discretionary funds. Pressure placed on junior staff to suppress internal reports. Accusations of coercive leadership within governance. William felt the pieces align. So, when he spoke, William said, You silence him. I prevented reputational harm. At the expense of principle. Sir Jonathan did not argue, because he knew, in that moment, the room shifted from confrontation to consequence. The camera would linger on William's expression. Not furious, not theatrical, but deeply disappointed. Where's Thomas Hallberg now? William asked. He accepted a severance agreement. Under what conditions? Non-disclosure. Voluntary. Sir Jonathan hesitated. Yes. William held his gaze long enough to communicate that he understood the difference between legality and integrity. Provide me with the full severance file, William said, including correspondence. Yes, sir. And Sir Jonathan, yes? You will refrain from contacting him. A beat. Understood. William turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. You believed you were protecting the monarchy. Yes, but you protected yourself. The door closed gently behind him. Outside, the corridor felt colder. Commander Hale stepped forward. Well, it reaches internal governance, William said. Fully. Hale absorbed the gravity. Will you suspend him? Not yet. Hale looked surprised. William continued walking. Immediate suspension signals crisis. I want documentation secured first, because exposure without preparation fractures institutions. And William understood the delicacy of this moment. Hours later, the Royal Household Committee reconvened, this time with less composure. Sir Malcolm's voice carried tension. You confronted Mercer? Yes. And he confirmed executive authorization. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. The head of legal leaned forward. If this becomes public, it won't, William said calmly. Now do we address it correctly? Sir Malcolm cleared his throat. Your Royal Highness, discretion remains critical. Discretion, William replied, is not concealment. The distinction hung sharp. Internal misconduct cannot be handled through unrecorded restraint. William continued. We will initiate formal internal judicial review under sovereign ethical oversight. The phrase carried institutional gravity, rarely invoked, irreversible once begun. Sir Malcolm's composure faltered. That clause has not been enacted in decades. Then it is overdue. Silence filled the chamber, not defiance, but recognition, because invoking the sovereign's ethical oversight clause meant bypassing committee insulation. It meant independent review, external auditors, document transparency. It meant exposure within walls before exposure without. Later that evening, William returned alone to the sealed corridor. Security tape still marked the entrance. He removed it himself, stepped through. The air felt denser than before. The handcuffs remained fixed around the pipe, photographed, catalogued, untouched. He approached slowly. For a moment, he imagined the scene months prior. A staff member escorted down narrow stairs. Confusion. Protest perhaps. The cold press of steel against wrist. Not imprisonment, but intimidation. And intimidation beneath royal foundations carried symbolism impossible to ignore. The echo of boots on concrete wasn't just sound. It was hierarchy descending unchecked. William reached out, not to remove the cuffs, but to steady himself against the pipe. It was colder than the air, cold like consequence. He closed his eyes briefly. Leadership is not tested when loyalty is easy. It is tested when exposure threatens comfort. He exhaled. Tomorrow, he would sign the Oversight Clause activation. Tomorrow, Sir Jonathan Mercer would be formally suspended pending review. Tomorrow, Thomas Hallberg would be contacted discreetly, not as an adversary, but as a witness. But tonight, in the quiet beneath Kensington Palace, William allowed himself one unguarded thought. Power without scrutiny corrodes faster than iron, and the corrosion had already begun. He turned to leave, footsteps echoing back toward light. Behind him, the chamber remained still, but the weight of authority had shifted, not toward concealment, toward reckoning. The palace had returned to an outward calm. Morning light streamed across the gardens, glinting off frost-tipped leaves, as if nothing had shifted overnight. But inside Kensington Palace, beneath polished floors and ceremonial halls, the atmosphere was heavy, dense with unspoken truths and unseen fractures. William moved quietly through corridors most staff believed inaccessible at this hour. The handcuffs in Corridor C, 19 had been photographed, catalogued, and locked once more, but the weight they represented lingered. They were more than metal. They were the silent emblem of authority exercised in secrecy, and the shadow it cast stretched further than anyone had anticipated. He had requested full access to archival storage, to every ledger, blueprint, and memorandum dating back decades. The task was delicate, document of extraordinary sensitivity, some centuries old, others labeled restricted, for sovereign eyes only. Within the thick, hushed walls of the archival chambers, the faint scent of aged paper and ink hung like incense, a reminder that history is both tangible and fragile. Dr. Eleanor March accompanied him, guiding him through stacks of bound ledgers. These are maintenance logs, she said. Dates, inspections, minor repairs, most routine, though some entries suggest non-standard activity. William's fingers traced the margins carefully. Notes in faded ink, erased and rewritten, cryptic annotations, often attributed to internal review, but occasionally signed by initials he didn't recognize. Some of these staff transfers, March whispered. They align precisely with unusual corridor access. William nodded slowly, absorbing the implications. Look here, she continued, pointing to a ledger concealed behind a rusted panel in the far corner. This was hidden intentionally. It lists a series of dates with names, times when personnel were escorted through corridors not in official records. He leaned closer. Names, dates, times, minimal explanation, obfuscated purpose. The final entry froze him. Thomas Hallberg, escorted late at night, signed off with initials matching the executive administrative tier code. Betrayal was not a concept easily measured. Not here. Not now. He closed the ledger with a soft snap and let the weight of it settle. Later, he arranged a discreet meeting with a former employee, a man who had resigned abruptly months before. He had left quietly, no public announcement, no fanfare. His name was Michael Fraser, and he had been responsible for logistical operations across the estate's sub-level corridors. Fraser agreed to meet at a neutral location, a small, nondescript tea room in Westminster, tables arranged close to prevent eavesdropping. William arrived alone. The room smelled faintly of baked bread and tea, mundane and grounding, a stark contrast to the tension he carried. Fraser's hand shook slightly as he spoke. I was told to escort a staff member. Late at night, down corridors no one knew were still accessible. Under whose orders? William asked. That's the thing. I never met the person issuing them directly, just a digital authorization. A code. He paused. I didn't know if it was safe to question it. I didn't know who might be watching. William listened, allowing Fraser to recount every detail. The narrow staircases, the hidden maintenance hatches, the muffled echoes in tunnels in use for decades, the fear in Hallberg's eyes when guided down the cold stone passage. And then the most unsettling part. Fraser described a small, dimly lit chamber, the same junction where the steel cuffs had been found. It wasn't punishment, he said softly. It felt like control. Purely, completely control. Like they wanted the space to remember that someone was always in charge. William's hands clenched slightly. The emotion was not anger. Not exactly. It was a moral weight. The realization that authority, untempered by accountability, could reshape behavior without a public audience. He returned to the palace alone that night. The corridors were empty. The moon cast pale reflections through occasional windows, illuminating centuries of stone. He stopped at the sealed gate to see 19. The handcuffs, cold and silent, gleamed under his flashlight. He crouched and traced their metal surface lightly with a gloved hand. They had once restrained a man. He knew now. Not an intruder, not a criminal, but a staff member of the Crown. The betrayal cut deeper than scandal ever could. He walked the length of the corridor, noting the architecture, the way pipes converge and diverge, the shadows hiding doorways and passageways no one would inspect routinely. See, 19 was not an anomaly. It was a node in a forgotten network, designed for efficiency during crisis, now repurposed for concealment. Back in the office, he summoned the household legal counsel. Confidentiality was paramount. Sir, the counsel said, if you formally invoke the sovereign's ethical oversight clause, it will trigger a full internal judicial review. I am aware, William replied. This is not about personal reputation. It is about principle. They discussed procedural strategy, ensuring evidence was documented without compromising ongoing safety protocols. Every step was meticulous. Lists of personnel, access logs, procurement records, correspondence, internal emails. Each confirmed that the misuse of the corridor had been deliberate, organized, and concealed. William paused to reflect on the broader implication. The Crown is a structure built on trust, ceremony, and legacy. Yet these unseen chambers reminded him that integrity is tested not in the public eye, but in the spaces where oversight falters. The corridors beneath the palace, designed to preserve continuity during war, had been co-opted to circumvent accountability. He felt the weight of centuries press against him. Leadership, he understood, was never merely about ceremonial duty. It was about confronting the decay within systems inherited from the past. He drafted an internal directive that night, classified, secure, irreversible. It invoked the ethical oversight clause. This would ensure an independent review of internal misconduct, starting with a chain of command implicated in the C-19 activities. He paused at the final paragraph. No person, regardless of rank or tenure, is above the duty to uphold integrity. Secrecy cannot supersede accountability. The Crown is preserved not by silence, but by vigilance. The directive sent a tremor through the palace's quiet hierarchy. Orders filtered downward, encrypted and compartmentalized. Staff whispered, careful to preserve appearances, while leadership recalibrated to an unprecedented level of scrutiny. That night, William returned once more to the corridor. Alone, the chamber remained silent, but it spoke, in the echo of stone, in the cold gleam of steel, in the rusted hinges and faded ledger entries. William understood something fundamental. Authority misused may leave no trace above ground, yet beneath, it imprinted itself forever. He ran a gloved hand along the iron pipe, feeling the texture of the past and the weight of present decisions. Leadership demanded he confront this misuse, even if doing so isolated him from trusted advisors. He exhaled, steadying himself in the dim light, for beneath the marble floors, the echoes of misuse were louder than any ceremony above. And the truth, William knew, would reshape everything about internal loyalty, oversight, and the moral authority of the crown. The palace was quiet now, but it was not at peace. The corridors above and below bore witness to weeks of scrutiny, whispered consultations, and carefully guarded truths. Kensington Palace, with its polished marble floors and stately portraits, seemed unchanged to the casual observer. Yet beneath that veneer, decisions were being made that would shape the moral and structural integrity of the crown for decades to come. Prince William entered the council chamber early that morning, joined by senior legal counsel, Commander Hale, and the heads of Royal Protection Command. The atmosphere was solemn, the kind of gravity that comes when responsibility outweighs ceremony, when moral obligation cannot be deferred or diluted by hierarchy. "Today," William said, his voice steady and formal, "we conclude this matter, not in spectacle, but in principle, not in accusation, but in accountability." The chamber fell silent. The first order of business was a permanent sealing of Corridor C-19, a reinforced steel grate, previously used only for temporary access, was installed under close supervision. Each bolt was tightened and documented, every step captured in a secure digital ledger. The chamber was no longer just a room beneath the palace. It had become a symbol. The symbolic act was clear. The crown would no longer allow any space to exist beyond ethical oversight. Commander Hale stood beside the pipe where the handcuffs had been discovered. His gloved hands adjusted the final lock. William watched, noting the subtle tension in Hale's posture, the mixture of relief and gravity that comes when a chapter of institutional misdeeds is formally closed. Next, attention turned to the official implicated in the misuse, Sir Jonathan Mercer. He had been summoned quietly, with all discretion afforded to his rank and years of service. Mercer entered the chamber with the precision of a man accustomed to order, yet even he could not conceal the gravity in his posture. "Sir Jonathan," William began, "your role in the events surrounding Corridor C-19 has necessitated a formal review. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty, pending inquiry. No dramatics, no public accusation, just procedural precision." "Yes, Your Royal Highness," Mercer replied, his voice measured, almost rehearsed. The acknowledgement carried no defiance, only recognition of the process he had breached. The review itself was meticulous. Documents were catalogued, interviews conducted, and internal logs examined. Every discretionary allocation, every authorization code, and every personnel movement tied to the corridor was scrutinized under the sovereign's ethical oversight clause. The operation was quiet, contained, and thorough, far from the sensationalism that often dominates public discourse. Meanwhile, reforms were drafted. The palace's internal safeguarding protocols were revised to ensure that no corridor, no utility room, and no archival chamber could exist beyond the reach of ethical review. Every access would now require dual verification, independent logging, and periodic audit. The monarchy's infrastructure, once built for secrecy during wartime, was now fortified for transparency. William addressed the closed-door council in a final meeting that afternoon. His tone was firm, measured, and resolute. Legacy is preserved not by silence, but by integrity. Authority must always be exercised with accountability. And every member of this household, from the newest officer to the most senior official, is entrusted not with power, but with responsibility. There was no applause, only the quiet acceptance that these words carried weight far beyond the chamber. They were a call to conscience, a mandate for vigilance. As the formal proceedings concluded, William walked alone through the palace gardens. The frost had begun to melt under the afternoon sun, streams of light tracing paths across carefully raked gravel. The stillness was deceptive. Every leaf, every sculpted hedge, every statue bore silent witness to centuries of duty, now renewed in purpose. He paused by a reflecting pool. The water mirrored the pale sky, fractured only by the occasional ripple of a falling leaf. In that calm, he considered the cost of leadership, the burden of decisions that could not be delayed, the weight of integrity in spaces where no one would see, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from acting rightly, even when recognition is absent. Below the marble floors, Corridor C-19 remained sealed. The handcuffs, cataloged and stored as evidence of misuse, were now inert, yet their presence lingered in memory, a reminder that ethical vigilance is not optional. It is a duty. In the following days, internal communications emphasized procedural adherence, transparency, and safeguarding reforms. Staff understood that the palace had acted decisively, yet discreetly. The monarchy chose to uphold accountability without scandal, demonstrating that true leadership does not require public applause, only moral courage. William returned to the sealed corridor one final time, placed his hand lightly on the reinforced grate. He did not enter. He did not inspect. He simply stood in quiet reflection, acknowledging the weight of responsibility and the significance of this act. In that moment, the chamber ceased to be just a corridor. It became a testament, a commitment that the crown will protect itself not only from external threats, but from internal decay, from secrecy that undermines trust, and from misuse of authority disguised as loyalty. He turned away slowly, walking toward the gardens once more. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the palace grounds. The day had been difficult, the work exhausting, yet in the deliberate calm of duty fulfilled, there was clarity, and a sense of moral rectitude that no scandal could ever replicate. Leadership, William knew, was not performance. It was responsibility. And today, the crown had chosen duty over convenience. The palace had returned to its measured rhythm. The ceremonial bells rang at scheduled intervals. Courtiers moved with the precision expected of centuries of tradition. Guests strolled through sunlit gardens. The outward facade of Kensington Palace remained as imposing and immaculate as ever. But beneath the marble floors and behind the gilded walls, something had changed. Quietly, imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. Prince William walked alone through the gardens that evening. The air carried a crispness that hinted at winter's end. Frost melted beneath his boots, leaving a subtle trace of impermanence. He did not hurry. He did not speak. He simply observed the palace's structure, its gardens, the orderly paths, and the reflective pools, each an expression of enduring care and careful stewardship. The events of the past weeks weighed heavily in his mind. The discovery of Corridor C-19, the handcuffs, the clandestine access, the misuse of authority, the delicate orchestration of the internal judicial review, all had converged into a single truth. Power, like the foundations of an ancient building, requires inspection to remain strong. William thought of Thomas Hallberg, of Sir Jonathan Mercer, of the silent corridors where history and secrecy intertwined. He thought of the handcuffs, catalogued and locked away, inert yet echoing with significance. The palace had weathered wars, revolutions, and public scrutiny. Yet, he understood now that the most insidious threats often come from within, not visible, not loud, but corrosive nonetheless. He paused near a reflecting pool, the water mirroring the gray sky above, the surface rippled with the faintest breeze, distorting his own reflection. In that moment, he realized that leadership is less about appearances than about unseen responsibility. Integrity is maintained not in public ceremonies or formal speeches, but in quiet decisions made when no one watches. The sealing of Corridor C-19, the removal of compromised authority, the institution of new safeguards, these were not acts for public approval. They were acts of moral clarity. Each bolt, each ledger entry, each procedural revision was a testament to the principle that legacy is preserved by courage, not convenience. He remembered the words of the archivist, that spaces forgotten by oversight can become instruments of control. He thought of the staff who had navigated those passages, unaware that history had layered itself over them like sediment, carrying weight far beyond their comprehension. In the cool evening, William walked along a row of sculpted hedges. The gardens were tranquil, yet he sensed the undercurrent of responsibility flowing through every brick, every beam, every human decision connected to the palace. Duty, he understood, is invisible to the public eye, yet it is the most essential structure of all. He reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. That vigilance is not optional in leadership. That authority must be exercised with accountability. That legacy is not maintained through silence, but through moral courage. The sealed chamber beneath the palace remained a symbol, not of scandal, but of redemption. It reminded him that inherited systems, no matter how venerable, require inspection, scrutiny, and a willingness to confront discomfort. As night descended, the palace lights glimmered softly. The corridors that concealed misuse of power were now locked, documented, and ethically secure. The crown had chosen transparency within, even if unseen by the public. William stopped at the edge of the gardens, gazing back at the palace. He thought not of victory or control, but of responsibility fulfilled. The way of the crown was not in its visibility, its ceremony, or its acclaim. It was in the quiet decisions made to uphold the integrity of those it governed. And in that quiet, he felt a profound sense of clarity. The palace would continue to endure, not because it was untouchable, but because it had been tested and purified from within. Its foundations, both literal and moral, had been examined and reinforced. Leadership, William realized, is an endless act of stewardship. Duty is a form of courage, and integrity is a form of protection. Above, the stars reflected on the palace roofs. Below, the sealed corridors carried no further secrets. The moral clarity of his choice, to confront, to reform, to preserve, would echo through the generations. The unseen burdens of authority had been acknowledged and met, and in that serene resolution, William understood something timeless. A crown is not merely a symbol of power. It is a promise to protect, to guide, and to preserve with honor, even when the world cannot see. He turned and walked back into the palace, each step deliberate, measured, aware, for the work of leadership never ends.